Obviously, this is the after-lunch sessions on day 2 of the MacGill Summer School. It's been mentioned to me a few times to note that the swim this morning was such a success that people are going to do it again tomorrow. So if you want to join the sea swim, all you have to do is be 8 a.m. outside here in the Highlands or 8:15 down in Portneuf. And I'll mention it again this evening, which is really important. Now, this is a really great session for us. It was mentioned already. Unfortunately, Dan O'Brien couldn't be with us today, unfortunately. So we have Seán Keys at last minute, who's joining us, which is fantastic. So please give him a specific round of applause for joining us. The idea of this session actually came when Stephen and I started chatting about MacGill this year. The theme of a fractured world, it's important for us to do a lot of things and talk about a lot of things, but the idea of taboo ideas to transform Ireland was a great approach and theme and session idea to get us to talk about things that could be challenging, or things we don't normally talk about, or things, and I think you used a great word for it as well, things sometimes we need to break or change to make us ready for the future, and that was a great way to think about it. To host this session, we have a fantastic person. You know Jess from last year. She's the head of the Human Sciences Studio in Accenture. She's an innovation researcher and a design historian as well. So please give a huge round of applause to Jess Majekodunmi. Thank you.
Well, thank you and hello. Thank you all for joining us here today. Thank you to Vince, Porg and Colin for inviting me back for a second year. And thank you again for the warm welcome of the people of Glenties. It's just brilliant coming up here. So, as Vince said, this topic is taboo ideas to transform Ireland. Now, someone said to me earlier, that sounds like it could be quite a racy panel and a bit spicy. So I think I better set a bit of a frame and a context for exactly what we are going to talk about. And it strikes me that probably in all our living memory, we are aware of some taboos that have been in yesteryear that are now today's norm. Like Ireland has transformed socially, economically, culturally. Things like divorce, same-sex marriage, and the very big one of foreign sports being played in hallowed grounds such as Croke Park. All of these former taboos from yesterday are now just part of our lives and part of society. That was previously unthinkable. So for the context of this panel today, I suppose taboo means the unthinkable. Unthinkable because if they're spoken and said out loud, they can provoke discomfort or outrage. They can be rejected. And those that say those ideas can be shut down or shouted over or ignored. And it strikes me that there's not many public spaces where this can happen. This is a very special place that actually we can raise these ideas, put them on the table, and be curious about them before we reject them. And so I encourage everybody who is listening here in the room and online to be curious about the ideas you're about to hear, from the panelists and also from each other. Now, there's a lovely quote from Caitlin Moran, who has already been quoted here today, or yesterday in MacGill. And she says that whenever I see a taboo, I just think that's something we need to drag screaming out into the light and discuss. And that is what I've invited my panelists here today. So let me very quickly introduce them. So we have Stephen Donnelly, who is a health consultant and the former Minister of Health. You're very welcome. And Seán Keys, as you said, a replacement for Dan O'Brien, who told me earlier this week he has an incurable case of man flu. So sympathies to Dan if he's tuned in online. But Seán is the Executive Director of Progress Ireland, which is a think tank who focus on housing and infrastructure, and the former finance editor of The Currency. So you're very welcome here today as well, Dan. Before I open up to our first idea, which will be coming from Stephen, I just want to give a sense of how this will run. So we have 4 ideas from the panel that we're going to start off with and put forward. And then in the spirit of the panel, as I said, this isn't about safe ideas or agreeable ideas or palatable ideas. They might make you feel uncomfortable or frown, and if so, good. We have succeeded, because this is not about being critical, it's about being curious. But then, afterwards, I want to invite you all to contribute your taboo ideas to transform Ireland at the end. So as opposed to necessarily questions, we're going to do this a little bit differently. So get thinking as we're talking, and I look forward to hearing them at the end. But for now, Stephen, I'm going to turn to you to introduce our first idea.
Thanks very much, Jess, and thanks for clarifying who I am. I've had 3 people over the last 24 hours kind of look at me, come over, put out the hand and go, "It's Peadar Tóibín, isn't it?" So for any of you here who are still wondering, no, it isn't. Yes, we do look a little alike. He's a good-looking chap. No one can take that from him. Our politics might be slightly different, but I'm not Peadar Tóibín, nor Dan O'Brien.
Yes.
Okay, I've had drunk people in pubs in Dublin on more than one occasion. One man, and I'll keep it clean, but one man in the bathroom of the pub put his hand out. "It's Dan, isn't it?" And I was like, neither I nor Dan would shake that hand, my friend.
Now that would be taboo.
So thank you for that. It's Stephen, not Peadar. I'm going to say something very simple as my first idea, but something that gets members of government in a lot of trouble and gets a lot of incoming if they are foolish enough or brave enough to say it, which is this: Ireland is a fantastic country, and if we're not such a taboo idea here, good. And if we are to be serious about navigating what is an increasingly fractured and turbulent world, we're going to have a different conversation about who we are, right? We need a balanced conversation. It's not that we shouldn't shine a light on the challenges. Of course we should, and we do, and we must always do that. But we've got to start bringing some balance. And it's been very interesting. So I've spent the last 14 years in Dáil Éireann, and so you have a skewed view of the national conversation. You don't really know what it is because you're in the goldfish bowl. But over the last 6 months, I've had the opportunity to be a private citizen, just kind of listening to it, while you're clattering the kids out the door to school, just kind of vaguely hearing it and looking at the newspapers and, seeing what's coming up. And what strikes me is kind of 3 things. The political debate has become harsher and harsher. And it's, you would be forgiven if you were watching Oireachtas TV for believing we live in a failed state. And we really, really don't. Social media has just gone completely off the reservation. 14 years ago when I went into politics, actually it was fairly benign. People used it to put out their ideas and have chats. Now it's just poison. It's lies and misinformation and hatred and racism and poison. But it is being consumed all the time. I've been going back and forth to London for the last while, and you look at people on the tube or you look at people in the airport, and 4 people in 5 are just scrolling through this poison. And then the mainstream media do a bit of both, but I think it's fair to say on average it's different, paper by paper and radio station by radio station and show by show. But on average the tendency is to focus on what is not working over balance between what is not working and what is working. And so you get this general sense, we are in a state of perpetual crisis. The doctors and the nurses are all leaving. The teachers are all leaving. The young people are all leaving. The government is uncaring and incompetent and corrupt, etc. Right? There's kind of this general background noise to all of this debate. Of course we have challenges. We have some immense challenges, some deadly serious challenges. Most of the big challenges we have being experienced by a lot of other countries like ours, like the housing crisis. That is a real crisis, and it is a real crisis in many comparable countries. So the level of negativity that we see, it's not normal. It's not that there aren't other countries like it, I'm sure there are, but it does feel like a particular thing going on in Ireland at the moment. When I have friends who come over from Canada or Australia or wherever it is, and they might have been in the country driving around in a rented car for a week, you meet them and they just say, "What is wrong with you people? Like, look, you have an amazing country, and of course you have challenges, and of course there are people hurting, and there are some really bad things happening, but my God, you have an amazing country. And you really wouldn't know it as a tourist coming into this country. What's up with you? Why won't you talk about the things that are working? Why won't you have a little bit of balance?" And so, while it's probably not normal, the extent of the negativity in our public discourse, it really does matter. It matters profoundly for the future and how good a game we're going to play, right? The Irish rugby team, it's one of the best rugby teams in the world. Can you imagine if every time they went onto the pitch, they believed we're useless, the management is useless and corrupt, and if I make a single mistake, I'm going to be dropped from the squad? Imagine how they would play. They wouldn't win as many matches as they do. It's the same for us, right? If you talk to public servants, I spent the last 5 years in health, as Minister for Health. And when you talk to civil servants and you talk to people in the HSE and say, folks, we need to innovate, we need to take risks. If we're going to adapt and innovate and do new things, we have to take risks. They'll say, well, look, here's how the game is stacked. If we do anything well, there will be no acknowledgement, there will be no reward, there will be no recognition ever for anything good we do. The second we make a mistake, we'll be all over social media, we'll be dragged in front of the Oireachtas, and we'll be in for it. So do you know what? We're not going to take risks. We're not going to innovate. We want to, but you guys have set the rules to nobble us if we do. So we're not going to do that. And it has a very kind of constraining effect on the people who we need to innovate and take risks on our behalf. I also believe, rightly or wrongly, it's anecdotal, that we have a generation of young people growing up who on average think that their country is rubbish, right? And one example is, I knocked on a door in Kilcool, and this mum came to the door and she said, Stephen, my son is living in Perth, and he rang me and he said, Mammy, I'm not coming home, there is nothing in Ireland for me. And he's right. And by the way, you're doing a terrible job. So I said, okay, well, you're here. Yeah. And this young lady here is presumably his kid sister. She's here. Yeah. And I said, and the sea and the mountains of Wicklow are here. And she said, yeah. I said, and of course, we're rated as the second safest country in the world after Iceland. So there's safety here. Yeah. And we're regularly ranked as one of the strongest democracies anywhere in the world. So there's democracy here. And she said, yeah. And I said, we're also rated as one of the most competitive countries in the world. And we've full employment. So there's employment here. Yeah. And we've just been rated as having the highest performing, or the best improving third level education system in Europe. And we have the highest level of degree attainment anywhere in the world. And she said, okay, I'll grant you that. So I said, okay. So, and she started to laugh, in fairness to her. I said, so just to be clear, other than his family, his friends, culture, the best pubs in the world, great crack, the amazing great outdoors of Wicklow, employment, safety, free world-class education for his children at primary, secondary and tertiary level. Other than those things, there is nothing here for him. And she laughed, and she kind of sighed, and she said, Jesus, we really need to cop ourselves on a little bit. Oh, well, I said, you need to tell him to cop himself on, right? And I said, look, we cannot compete with the beaches in Perth. And we can't compete with the kind of wages he might be making in the mines or whatever he's doing over there, right? But we've got to stop writing our country off. And I think it really has got into the psyche of our young people. There's a question, when I in the Dáil over several years would meet teenagers and people in their early 20s, students coming in for TY or for work experience, we'd sit down with them and how do you think we're doing as a country? By and large, they'd say it's a mess. The country's a mess. The healthcare system's a mess. Housing's a mess. Everything's a mess. And I'd explain the UN's Human Development Index to them, which is kind of a global measure of how well countries are doing. Right? It's a combination of how wealthy, healthy and educated we are. And I'd say to them, look, the UN ranks 120 countries in the world. Where do you think we are? No one has ever given me a number less than 50. Ever. This is how they think. Because the phones that they are spending 3-4 hours a day, every day, tell them that everything is rubbish in their country. And one year, now I think we're 10th or 11th this year, but a few years ago I was asking this young woman in the Dáil canteen, and I said, we're second. We're joint second with Germany. And she couldn't get it. She couldn't internalise she couldn't bring these two things to be true, that this country that she's being told from day one is a kip, is in fact the second most developed or progressive or ranked country in the world. So these things matter. We'll get into, I've probably spoken for far too long, we might get into, there's some fairly simple but probably uncomfortable things we could do to start changing the conversation. But certainly that's my first idea, is there is a real urgency as a nation to having a balanced conversation about who we are and what we are capable of achieving. Thank you.
Thank you. And this is so interesting. I mean, we heard in the previous panel, for those who were in it, a similar sentiment come up. And there was this kind of clash and tussle between how we feel about that discourse and the relentless negativity, but then on the flip side, the sense of we want to be really proud of being Irish. And it feels like these two clash, like we can't criticise and also be proud. I mean, does that come into the sense of pride of Irishness in terms of we should be proud of all these achievements?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we must criticise. I spent several years in opposition throwing all manner of criticism at governments at the time. So I'm guilty of being part of what I'm decrying. So I think you can, of course, be proud and criticise, but I wonder how that pride works if all you do is criticise. Mm-hmm. If there's no part of you saying, I demand justice on behalf of these people, right? Be it children with intellectual disabilities or people who can't afford a home, I demand better for them. Good, we need that. We must never lose that. But if you're not willing to ever say, however, I want to acknowledge there are fantastic things in this country. If they say they're proud, well, then they're proud. It's not what I would recognize. It feels like an unusual pride if you're incapable or unwilling to acknowledge anything positive. Yeah. What is it you're proud of, I wonder?
Yeah. Seán, I was actually reading the founding statement that you wrote. Yeah, I know, I did my research on the think tank website, and you had a lovely line in it that actually I think connects to this point about that Ireland doesn't feel as rich as it is on paper. And I wonder whether some of this negativity or pulling us down this mindset of complaining is because that although those stats are all there, the actual experience of people, it's not just the discourse, but actually our experience of living here maybe doesn't match some of those with joint number two.
Yeah, I mean, part of that, to be fair, is just GDP figures are distorted a little bit, and if you adjust the GDP figures and use the right figures, the gap narrows. But I think that what strikes me from what I'm hearing is, so one specific way that this hurts us is around ambition, and like I think about infrastructure all the time. Like if an Irish politician is pondering whether to go ahead with an ambitious project or not, they'll sort of shy away from it because they're worried it'll go wrong, they're worried they'll be blamed for it, they're worried it'll be a fiasco. And that's not how you find it in other countries, it's not how you find it in especially places like the US or Australia or Canada. And I think there's something to that as well, that if you look at, there's a culture gap between Ireland and Europe and these new world countries and how they treat growth and ambition. And if you look at population growth figures, European countries grow at like less than 0.5% per year over time, but like these new world countries will grow at twice or triple that rate. And they've got a culture that's a fit for how fast they're growing. They're like builders, they're frontier people. They like they have an appetite for risk, all the things that goes with it. But Ireland's here, we've got the European culture, and our population is growing at 1.5% a year. We're growing at the Canadian rates, the American rates, but we've got this old-fashioned European culture that isn't so comfortable with growing, changing, building, taking risks, showing ambition. I think there's a mismatch there.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly see in my own role working in innovation, like a lot of self-censorship of those ambitious ideas and those things that could progress us. And I wonder, before we move on to the second one, Stephen, you mentioned that you had some potential ideas that could be uncomfortable for us to maybe change this mindset, because mindsets aren't easily changed. They're quite ingrained. What are the actual things that we might do to flip this and become...
Well, I think there's a few, right? Yeah. One thing I think we really should do is start treating the social media platforms as publishers with verified accounts, right? And in fairness, at an EU level, there is important legislation that has been passed and is kind of beginning to permeate out. But I think Ireland really should take a leading role in this. With my old healthcare hat on, the damage that is being done from a health perspective is, I mean, it's horrific. And in years to come, we will look back at it like smoking. I mean, it is horrific. There's a brilliant team that we set up 2 years and a half ago at this stage that will hopefully be reporting soon on some radical interventions here. But I think we have to treat them as publishers. This idea that you can just, not just put up for people to look at, but actively target people with all of this misinformation and lies, it's just corrosive to social cohesion. And I think we should treat them as publishers. I don't know why we don't. Like, newspapers are, and mainstream media is just not allowed to. They would be shut down in a day if they engaged in what the social media platforms do. So I'd love to see that. I think we have to fund mainstream media better. The pressure that the journalists are under and their editorial teams are under is unbelievable. And so they're competing with social media, which is deeply unfair. And a lot of the advertising money has gone online, which means they don't have the time and the space and the job security themselves to do the more in-depth and thoughtful pieces. They just have to get volume out, and they have to get it out quicker and quicker. And so I'd love to see a way of having a well-resourced mainstream media with good contracts for the journalists. But the flip side of that being, could we do a review of the positive versus negative, right? So I did a quick ChatGPT a few days ago in preparation for this and said, go back over the last 20 years and available articles on healthcare in Ireland and categorise it positive, neutral and negative. And it came back 70% negative, 20% neutral, 10% positive, which doesn't feel wrong. I was surprised it was up to 10%, but I'm biased, right? But it matters. Let me give you just one quick example, right? A quick show of hands. Who in the audience is familiar with the overspend on the Children's Hospital? Anybody? Oh look! Every single person. We've Canadians down the back going, yeah, we've heard about it too, right? Who here is familiar with the cost of the bike shed? Anybody? Everybody. Okay. Now, neither of which I am defending, right? My point is around balance. Who here is familiar with a new pharmaceutical contract that we signed in the Department of Health about 4 years ago? Okay. Now, the total overspend on the Children's Hospital, right? The bike shed, in public spending terms, is a small fraction of the total capital budgets, but the Children's Hospital isn't. It's a big piece. Let's assume, just for the sake of the debate, that the overspend against a realistic initial estimate is about €250 million. Now, I'm not saying it is, but let's just say it's about 250 million. Think of the amount of time and anguish and shouting and roaring and frustration and real anger that the nation has felt over that, probably over about 8 years now. So 250 million, let's say. The pharmaceutical deal was due to save the state 750 million. So 3 children's hospital overspends. In fact, it's on track to save the state $1 billion. So 4 children's hospital overspends. And it's not that we didn't publicise it. We did. We press released on it. We put it out. I spoke about it till I was blue in the face, which is a pink Irish man, is a lot of speaking. But nobody cares, and nobody carried it, because it's good news. And it showed a really competent Department of Health doing really important things. And so my point is this. If all you know about is the bike shed and the children's hospital, and you've no additional piece of information that says, by the way, 4 times that was saved in this other good thing the Department of Health did, then we don't really have a balanced understanding of our country and what we're good at and what we're bad at.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's the first taboo idea. Ireland is a fantastic country. What you're going to appreciate in this conversation is that we are going to take quite disparate topics and jump around, but that is the nature of getting ideas and ideating and getting them out on the table. So next I'm going to invite you, Seán, to introduce your idea.
Thanks, Jess. So I was invited along. Taboo ideas. Let's encourage. This is a safe space. Everything's on the table. So my first idea is it's an underrated idea from 1930s Germany. Now, so here we are. Imagine go to MacGill in 2045, and the population of Ireland is closer to 7 million people. So we need to house an additional 1 or 2 million people in 20 years. So how are we going to do it? There's basically 2 ways of thinking about this built environment that we're going to create. One end of the spectrum is all roads, something like Houston or Atlanta or something like that, and the other end is all trains. So they're basically the options we have open to ourselves. And the roads option, it's practical. Like, it can work. You absolutely can accommodate lots of people by building tons and tons of roads. There's no doubt about it. It's proven. We'd have to get comfortable with it. We'd have to build ring roads upon ring roads, another one around Dublin, all the big cities, retail parks, suburbs, acres of tarmac, all of that sort of stuff. While it would work if we did it, I'm not sure that's something that we actually want to do, if we want that lifestyle. If our governments would make the investments year after year after year to make it happen, climate commitments, all that stuff. Not sure it's a path we really want to go down. The other side is the train side. I mean, trains are great. Everyone loves trains, and I love trains anyway. But everyone loves trains. They have great qualities. Because they've got this enormous carrying capacity on a metro, you can do very interesting things. You can build, very large urban areas around in very small parcels of land. Make nice walkable places with their own life and their own street life, and it sort of feels like an extension of the city rather than some soulless place. And they're carbon efficient as well. That's good. But as we know, building trains is hard. Building metro systems is very hard. It's complex. It's expensive. It's slow. So slow. And it's risky. So what I'm here to say is that there's actually a third way to do it, which has a lot of the benefits of this metro system option, much less cost, much faster. And it's an idea from 1934 in Berlin. So the people of Berlin, the city planners, looking at their city. And, the city's congested, and they're looking at it, and it's got this legacy infrastructure from the 19th century, these rail lines that sort of spider out in every direction, east, north, south, east, west. But the rail lines, they're not designed for Berlin. They're designed to bring stuff to Berlin. They connect to the city. They don't connect the city. So they said, right, well, what if we were to build a tunnel from the north to the south, from the northern rail terminus to the southern rail terminus? Then all those northern lines would be in one large network with all the southern lines. You'd have a network there, and you could put stations in the middle of the city, connecting to where all the jobs are. And then, one critical piece of infrastructure, one tunnel, one short tunnel, and you've got a makeshift metro system. So that's what they did. It worked very well. After the war, it was copied all over Germany, then copied all over Northern Europe. Then they have them now in every major Australian city. They have them in the UK. They have them in Japan has them. They don't have them in the US. But this is the big idea, essentially. This is Dublin. Dublin has an eastern rail terminus and a western rail terminus and nothing in the middle. It's got acres of green fields and double track rail lines going out towards the west. In the east of the city, it's got the dart lines, which are developed but not very intensely developed and not at their full capacity. So let's do it. 1 5-kilometre tunnel, 1/3 the length of the metro tunnel. Not as complex, not as difficult, but with far greater kind of potential. And one final bit of taboo is to justify this investment. Obviously, you're building a tunnel; it's not cheap. To justify that, you've got to build loads. The green fields in the west of Dublin would not look like green fields. The suburbs of Killester or Blackrock wouldn't look like they look today if you were to do this right. Thank you.
What would they look like?
Well, how dense? I mean, yeah. You look. We're talking about density here. Density doesn't need. We joked before that we turn Blackrock into Benidorm. That's not what we're talking about. To build lots of homes, to build high density, you don't necessarily need to build Benidorm. Density doesn't. The truly dense places don't tend to look like Benidorm or New York. If you view them from above, they're dense. They use the land efficiently. They might have 4, 5, 6, 7 stories of courtyard blocks around the land. But the level of along the coast, absolutely. In West Dublin, definitely. There is empty land that is itching to be connected up and to form a network. Okay,
so Taboo idea number 2. And it strikes me that if we're borrowing from 1930s Germany, would we also have to just completely disregard any kind of official planning or what people think and just push this through to get the tunnel done and never mind who lives above it, around it?
In theory, no. I mean, we're not. Hopefully, we're not too far from getting a railway order on the Metro link. Look, I mean, planning is a whole separate conversation. But look, I mean, there's 2 problems with planning. One is that the locals don't like the stuff being built there. That's a hurdle. Another hurdle is that the planning system, the planning bureaucracy, the planning culture doesn't want something to happen. And I think in this instance, you would have the planning system on your side. This is the type of development that the planning system is trying to encourage and does want to see: compact, transit-oriented development. And there's a whole lot of other benefits to do it. You can fund the land by selling it. When you build intensely along rail lines, you can fund it by selling the development rights up front. Lots of other cool things you can do. But anyway, it's doable within our existing paradigm. We don't need fascism along with it.
That's very grateful for that. You mentioned there about kind of like it's actually these type of really ambitious infrastructural ideas that will need to accommodate an extra 2-3 million people living in Ireland. We're always talking about get back to the 8 million. But what about the regional balance here? This seems very focused on Dublin. I know you said it could happen in Cork or Limerick, but what about the rural communities? Like, what are the knock-on effects around all of that?
Yeah, well, I think this is an idea for places that got big in the 19th century and have loads of rail lines that kind of lying around that aren't being fully used. That's Dublin, but it's also a lot of other Irish smaller cities and bigger towns. And the basic principle is you're electrifying them and you're building very intensely along them and you're making sure that you run through where the jobs are. That's it. Ireland, if we are going to 7 million people, I think there's no escaping the roadside. We will need more roads. You can't pretend that we can do it without roads. But roads work okay at certain densities. You don't necessarily want to grow Dublin or Cork or Galway to its next level by relying on roads. That's when things get a bit messy.
Yeah. So you're in Wicklow, aren't you? How would you feel about a little bit of a 20-storey buildings along the Wicklow coastline?
Well, just not in Greystones, obviously. It's where we swim. We could look at the voting patterns from last November and maybe we could do it based on that. No. Look, I mean, there are cows grazing inside the M50. That doesn't happen in other countries. So I think anything that increases density, Seán's talking about Dublin specifically, but anything that increases density, at least based on my deeply flawed understanding of urban development, is a good thing, right? With certain guardrails around it, obviously, right? And you need the community facilities. I love the idea of a high-speed, high-capacity underground in Dublin. Dublin, we were discussing over lunch. Dublin is quite a tribal city. I've lived in various parts of Dublin. I've lived north of the river, south of the river, and there's not as much movement as I think you see in cities like London and other places where there is an underground to get people places quickly and cheaply and reliably. So I think anything that did that would be good. I'm thinking with my old government hat on in
Oh,
terms
no.
of when you're trying to do these big audacious things, it's incredibly difficult. Dara O'Brien brought through a massive new planning bill, which I know very little about, because any time he tried talking to us about it, we just leave the room. But it might fix some of these things. I know they were very keen, for example, on this crazy situation where anyone in the country can object to anything for free and wrap things up in judicial review. And so I think that's been dealt with. It was a very long, complex bill, so I imagine a lot of other things have been dealt with. But I guess one of the questions for the nation would be, if this is the right idea, do we have the legal infrastructure in place to actually make it happen? Or are we going to just tie ourselves up in review after appeal and it not happen? I don't have an answer to that, but that would be one of the things you'd want to check.
Yeah, no, I think in the planning bill, I think one of the important pieces to do something like this, not necessarily this specific scheme, but really ambitious city extensions with loads of people living in a master planned area. There's an element of the planning bill is designed just for that, and it's basically, we'll master plan an area, we'll get all the objections in up front, we'll have all the rows up front, we'll consult, and then we'll make a decision, and that will be the decision, and that will be the final master plan, and thereafter, no planning permissions. So that's an important tool to do big things like we're talking about.
Yeah. Actually make a decision, stick to it. Because these things, when you first explained this idea, I was like, it seems obvious, like connect the stations and then we'll get the density. But then very quickly you can get into all these pragmatic ideas and then into planning laws, and then my mind starts just getting quite sleepy. But it's kind of like, why does this have to be taboo to get through something that kind of almost seems obvious in order to plan ahead for those 2-3 million, and yet they are somehow unspeakable ideas, because actually we need to get our head around this pretty soon because the population is rising at every count. Okay. Thank you. Second idea. Back to you, Stephen. Looking across ideas for number 3.
Second idea is that Ireland has the potential to be a global leader in preventative healthcare if we get much more comfortable about AI and a lot of other emerging technologies that are coming, right? Now, that is probably counterintuitive for people in a few ways, right? Because implicit in what I'm saying, I am challenging the narrative that the HSE is failing. So Sam McBride, who was superb last night, except for one sentence, where he just dismissed the HSE. And he said, well, the HSE is failing and universal healthcare is inching forward. It's not. The HSE is improving rapidly. They're doing incredible work. It's not all the way there, but it's moving really quickly. Again, for the reasons we discussed previously, people don't know about the progress. But over the last 3 years, waiting times have fallen by 60%. Right? The department couldn't find another country in Europe that had achieved anything like that. ED pressures are falling, women's healthcare has been transformed, there's a lot of really good things happening. Now, I'm not for a moment am I suggesting that it's fixed and everything is right. It's not. I know it's not. But it's moving in the right direction so quickly that we are on track to have achieved universal healthcare in our country within the next 5 years. Now, that is something that most of us thought would never happen. You know, the narrative on the HSE is it's a black hole, it's you'll wait for years and so on. So in order for what I'm saying to be true, we need a high-performing, highly effective public health service. And so the first thing I'm stating is that contrary to the national view on this, we have a public health service that is improving at an extraordinary rate. And we can see patient outcomes getting better and better and access getting better and better. Without that, you couldn't do what I'm talking about. The second thing is, I'm now going to channel my inner American. My wife always says you're an American trapped in an Irishman's body, because you like these big, ambitious ideas, which don't quite fit the political discourse in Ireland. But what I'm saying is, not only are we on track to deliver universal healthcare, we have the capability of being one of the best in the world in terms of what's coming. So healthcare, the global conversation on healthcare is fundamentally changing. All over the world, we have a health service that says, if you get sick, we'll fix you. There's a wave of innovation coming. Some of it's already here. AI is the glue that holds a lot of it together, but it's genotyping, robotics, genetics, bioprinting, printing organs, replacement organs in hospitals rather than having to use donors, etc. Right? There's this vast wave coming. And the big change it's going to make, if we can figure out how to make it happen, is rather than saying, we feel unwell in a variety of ways, we go to our GP does a bunch of tests and says, look, bad news, you've got type 2 diabetes. And this is going to profoundly affect the rest of your life in a pretty bad way. In the future, if we do this right, we will have a health service where you'll get an alert saying changes in your cells have been identified, which, if left untreated, will give you type 2 diabetes in 5 years, or COPD, or hypertension, or whatever it is. So come on in, and we've all sorts of advanced treatments now, and we're going to basically stop you getting it. So the entire purpose of a health service shifts from one that tries to fix you when you get sick to one that keeps you well for as long as possible, and then, inevitably, if something bad happens, can fix you. Ireland, there's no country in the world has worked this out. It's all moving very fast. It's very confusing and it's very exciting. Ireland is incredibly well placed to be a world leader, and I would love to see us make a stand on this and say, look, we have a healthcare service which is getting better at an incredible rate on behalf of patients. We have rolling out a new e-health strategy, so we're going to have the digital infrastructure in place soon enough. We have in Ireland a pharma hub, a health tech hub, a digital hub. So we've brains to burn around the country in terms of some of the things that can happen. We have a very attractive country for these things. It's big enough that you can really roll these things out. It's small enough and integrated enough that you can get your head around doing it at a population level. Now, what would we all need to do? We'd all need to start getting comfortable with getting medical advice from an algorithm. Okay? We need to get our heads around that one. Not that there aren't humans involved and that there isn't accountability, but you would be getting clinical advice from an algorithm. How do we feel about that? Most of us would have to be comfortable sharing our data. I mean down to the genetic level. Anonymized, but still sharing it. Because in order for these things to work, you have to have a big, big pool of data, and it's much better if it's national data rather than international data, because it deals with all of our idiosyncrasies rather than another country's idiosyncrasies. And so that's it. If we can get our heads around becoming comfortable with AI, and if we can become comfortable with the idea that this is a public good, our data becomes a public good with the right protections around it, we could be one of a handful of countries in the world that does something truly mind-blowing and extraordinary and flips our entire concept of what a public health service is into one that keeps us well. And the final thing I'd say is it's very important to me anyway that it is a public service. It should not be something that wealthy people can afford. My view is that a well-functioning public health service is a vital glue in social cohesion. Listen, those of you who were here last night heard Sam McBride say, "I love the NHS," and they do, right? Have you ever heard anybody say, "I love the HSC," right? Now, I'm going to give you one quote from the chair of the British Medical Association in Northern Ireland, Dr. Tom Black, who said, I checked this when I went back to the room last night after listening to Sam, right? The waiting times in Northern Ireland today for the most pressing procedures are 11 times longer than they are in the HSE. And yet, he will sit here proudly and say, "I love the NHS." And not one person would say, "Well, I love the HSE," even though the gap is that big. Imagine we could create a public health service that we were comfortable saying, we love it, and we're proud of it, and it's imperfect, and see it as a world leader in keeping us all that little bit healthier. Thank you.
Thank you. I almost feel obliged to ask Seán, like, would you say that statement, do you love the HSE?
Of course I do.
Okay. So this third idea, which to me is almost like this techno-optimist utopian dream of preventative healthcare, but is actually right now a lot of anxiety around AI and its applications. I mean, you even referred to some of it in terms of how the social media algorithms are kind of distorting our worlds, never mind taking bias into things as critical as healthcare. I was looking at a study that surveyed 10,000 people in the US and also in Europe, and currently only 12% would agree to AI-recommended surgery. I actually thought that seemed a bit high. How do we get from where that is now and those fears that are quite real? They're not just negative discourse, I don't think, about AI. There are big issues there to getting more comfortable. Is it like a kind of a creeping in of AI into our healthcare system? Or where's the vision for changing how we think about what decisions algorithms could make to our lives and to our families' lives?
It's coming in anyway. The question is, do we really leverage it for this kind of transformational change in terms of longevity and all of these wonderful things? And in more and more GP services now, we may not know it, but there's an algorithm listening to the entire conversation, categorizing what we say, and then when we leave, prompting the GP, saying, hey, Stephen referenced these 4 things, you never checked this, right? So it's happening more and more anyway. If in more hospitals in Ireland now, there's a machine beside the bed, and the patient is wired up to it, and that is monitoring all sorts of stuff at a level of complexity that the doctors and nurses would struggle to maintain consistently, and flagging, saying, hey, this person's going to crash in half an hour, you need to intervene. So AI is coming in to help clinicians anyway. If you go into a hospital today, or your GP, there's a decent chance that it'll already be involved in some way. So how do we have a national conversation about when it just starts becoming more and more obvious, right? So there's a company that's looking to do a deal in the UK. They've an app, which is a triage app for the GP. And they believe no one should be allowed phone a GP unless in an emergency, that you got to go through the triage. And the app will identify a lot of people who just don't need to go to the GP, or in fact need to go to hospital straight away. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's kind of where that's how the innovators are thinking. And so I think we have a job to do to say, look, there are some very clever people at an EU level and at a member state level who have worked their way through a lot of this, and they've set out principles for AI. Within healthcare, there has to be accountability, so it has to link back to a human being. There has to be transparency. There has to be security of data, and we probably need to have, it's a fairly complex conversation to have, but we probably need to have that conversation, be very respectful of people's anxieties, be very respectful of the fact that this is all new and we're all trying to get our heads around it. And if there are worries people have that are not dealt with in the legislation or aren't being implemented properly in the legislation, then we need to act on them. We need to take a very humble approach to this, because this is brand new. And it's the kind of thing where if an error is made, like if the algorithm if AI makes a mistake and something bad happens to a person, like doctors make mistakes regularly and bad things happen to people. The first time the robot does it, it will be all over the news in a way that it just isn't with humans. So we need to, I think we need to be very humble, we need to listen very carefully, and we need to remember that, you know, this is brand new and it's evolving, and we need to be able to change and adapt pretty quickly.
It also strikes me that we need to be thinking about consequences that are outside the healthcare system, because it's not just an isolated system. I mean, we were talking earlier and we heard a story of someone who had an issue with a smear test, and it affected an ability to get mortgage cover, which almost stopped her from getting an apartment. So, you know, in this predictive world, if I'm predicted to have diabetes and I'm seen to buy a sugary cereal, that I can't then get health insurance, or actually I'm going to go down the list of being able to get medication because maybe I've done it to myself, is, without edging into Minority Report, which I know was more about crime, but for healthcare, does it start then getting kind of almost policing people and judging them on their access to healthcare depending on lifestyle? Thinking through all of those, there could be very interesting decisions that private companies who are holding the insurance could then affect this ability, or have people fearing sharing data in order to get good healthcare conditions.
Different sectors do it in different ways, right? So in car insurance, insurers openly do it. What age are you? Right? You're 21. You're 21-year-old fella. Yeah, no, thank you. That'll be 25 grand, please. Right? So we already do it to some extent. In healthcare, we don't tend to do it much. We have community rating, so you're not allowed to do it based on age, which is the single biggest, broad predictor. They do it to some extent on pre-existing conditions. They say, well, you already have something, and so we will insure you for that in 3 years or 4 years, but not for the first few years. Could they say, well, you actually have a pre-existing propensity to develop something? I don't know. That would have to be teased out very carefully in law and regulation. Yeah,
you were talking about 10 years, you think, that this could be true?
Look, this is moving so quickly that it's very hard to say, but I'll be surprised if healthcare doesn't look quite different 10 years from now.
Happening all very quickly then. So we do need to have debate and discussion around personal data, and also accepting or considering how algorithms could affect recommendations and choices beyond what we might want to binge this weekend on TV. Okay, thank you very much for idea number 3. And our final idea from the panel before we start coming to you for your taboo ideas. Over to you again, Seán.
Thanks. Second idea is, planning, right? We all know it's broken. Successive governments try to fix it. It resists fixing. It's very hard to fix. And there are 3 reasons why it's so hard to reform our planning system. First is legal. Planning law is so complex, and the body that is so great. If you try to change one thing, you might end up clashing with another aspect of it. You get thrown out in the courts. Ask Owen Murphy about that. Second reason it's so hard to change is that planning it's not like a rule book. It's an institution with people, and it has a culture, and it wants things. And a leader of that institution is constrained by that culture. There's a corporate cliche that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and that's supposed to tell the CEO to be a bit humble about how much control he really has, or she really has, over their organization. Culture is so important. The third reason, and it's probably the hardest one of all to change, is politics. The politics of housing are impossible. The people who live near housing, new construction, they're always going to dislike it because they get nothing from it. They get construction noise, their built environment changes, new ugly buildings, the parking, the traffic, all of that. And so any effort to reform planning is constantly runs into that brick wall of people don't want to change. And so here we are, we're trying to reform this thing. It seems unreformable. What are we going to do? So what I'm proposing is, let's not try to reform that system, which is unreformable, and instead let's just try to build a new route that gets us to the same destination of the building that we like, that's broadly popular and is compatible legally and so on. And so what I'm talking about here is when you think about housing, there's a ton of value is created when new housing is built, especially in Ireland, because there's so much pent-up demand. But as things stand, the value is shared entirely between the builder and the buyer and the government that gets some tax from it. The locals, who effectively have a veto over what can be developed, they get nothing out of it. So in principle, it ought to be possible to come up with some kind of a mechanism or a rule that shares this benefit more broadly, so that the people who effectively have the veto have a reason to say yes to the thing. And I've seen it. It exists. Progress Ireland have been working on this. We kind of cadge the idea from folks in the UK. In the UK, their mechanism, it's just gone through Parliament, but it's not been finally enacted yet. They're waiting on the secondary legislation. They, in turn, copied it from Tel Aviv and Seoul in South Korea. So in Tel Aviv and Seoul, you've got these mechanisms where they have very hyper-local areas are allowed to come up with their own planning rules, like the level of a street or an apartment building. And those people will basically jointly come up with a planning scheme that they all can agree on, and they'll vote on it. And if some supermajority of the people vote on it, 2/3 of the people or whatever, that's the new planning system. So this is an interesting idea, and it unpicks a lot of the fundamental problems of the planning system. Here's how we think it would work in Ireland. So imagine a small area like a street, single street, houses you can see from your front door, something like that. Someone on your street proposes the new planning rules for your street and puts it, they're seeking to eventually put it to a vote of the neighbours and get 2/3 majority in favour of it. But before it gets to the vote, so you'll consult with the neighbours. You say, right, like, what do you really hate about development? What do you medium hate? What are you kind of okay with? What do you like? Consultation, bang heads together, and we'll come up with a plan that we all are mutually, 2/3 of us at least, are mutually okay with. And so when you're thinking about development, a lot of it is just aesthetics. People don't like ugly apartment blocks. They don't like towering, out-of-character apartment blocks. They don't like the feeling that the local services will be stretched. They don't like this feeling there'll be cars all over their street. If you are jointly coming up with a deal that everyone can sign on to, you can overcome those objections. You can say, all right, well, what if the new plan it caps out at 4 stories, it's kind of a handsome-looking Georgian-style terrace type thing that, the type that people actually love buying in certain neighbourhoods. What if it looked like that? What if there are subventions to the council? What if there is no extra parking spaces? Whatever. You put it to vote. So what you might be thinking, like, all right, this is fine, but why would people actually vote for more building on their neighbourhoods? Didn't you just say people hate building in their neighbourhoods? The reason that people in these other cities have done it is, I think there's 2 basic reasons. One is that they have more control. Development isn't like landing on top of them from a developer and planning office. They can sort of shape it and mold it and overcome the things that they really hate about development. I think that's very important. And the second thing, which as being a kind of a joyless bean counter economist type, I think is significant, is if this new plan passes, your street, this new plan, you would have the automatic right to build this thing on your street. No more planning permission. All right? So if you have a semi-detached home somewhere in West Dublin or Cork or wherever it is, that's quite low density, and you've got like a 1/4 of an acre and a reasonably big garden. If this thing passes on your street, you now have the right to develop it at the density of a 4-story terrace. And you might not be personally in the mood or have the risk appetite for building a 4-story terrace, building a granny flat for yourself underneath it, or building an apartment block on the top for the income, or just building a really big house for yourself, or whatever it is. Even if you don't want to do any of those things, even if you just want to retain your normal semi-detached house, it's now going to be worth a lot more because it's got this option to develop it attached to it. So that's what I mean about trying to spread the benefits of development more widely. Land in Dublin, land in Ireland is so valuable. It's so in demand. If we can unlock it and come up with a reasonable way to let people access it, I think you can create a win-win situation where everyone benefits and a lot more housing built.
So this is local residents coming together, agreeing, negotiating what the planning rules will be like in their area, and that will then be accepted and be what can be developed
on their street. Yeah.
On their street. I can only imagine my residents' WhatsApp group if this came in; it would be on fire. It strikes me on one side you could see this as this is really empowering people in terms of what will happen on the street, but the flip side of being empowered is almost feeling burdened by this. I mean, I have no clue about planning and buildings. I've got a few notions around architectural aesthetics, but I'm not sure what's right or what's wrong. And so how do you balance that out? Where does expertise come in? Where does kind of an understanding on a broader plan for a city or a town or an area, how do you reconcile those things?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If I had to come up with a thing like in crayon, like, you know, it wouldn't be good to come up with a plan. I think in practice you would see templates emerging. Part of it is we would invite the councils to sort of designate these areas, because councils have an interest in this. Councils, when the local authorities want to see, you know, gentle infill and suburban development, you know, these low-density suburbs around our cities are not good for a city. They're not good for transport. They're not good for anything we want. So anyway, my answer is I would expect there would be support. There would be firms that would offer the services. There would be templates from the council. You could copy schemes that have worked elsewhere, and you would have your hand held through the process.
Handheld, so staying from the grassroots and coming up. It's a very intriguing idea. It was interesting you said it happened elsewhere. I'd never come across that at all.
Yeah, the ones in Korea and Israel are around apartment blocks. It was basically a lot of old apartment blocks that were decrepit, and they're owned by, you know, 25 people. What are we going to do with this thing? And they will put it to a vote, and you know, let's rebuild it. Everyone can benefit from it. We put it to a supermajority vote. There's sort of a cousin of it in the UK, which are council regeneration. So you have council housing schemes in English cities. They've resisted development for a very, very long time for the reasons I said. You know, people didn't like the thought of a developer coming in, knocking their home, not being sure where they're going to end up afterwards. The way they overcame it was like, okay, we'll propose a specific scheme to their existing residents, put it to a vote. They will get a new block, a new unit in the new scheme, and that's been a huge success too. You're seeing like 95%, 85% of people in all these schemes around London agreeing to it, and then the land being used much more intensely as well.
Okay, thank you. So that is our fourth idea. So we have heard Ireland is a fantastic country. How we can draw on 1930s Germany and learn from how they electrified suburban to increase the density. AI-powered predictive healthcare systems so we can become trailblazers on the world stage. And a new way of thinking about planning permission in local areas where residents decide what it looks like from the ground up. So this is the moment now where I'm about to invite you. Oh, look at the hands going up. I drew this out to my own network to get a few ideas, just in case there were short of ideas in the room, but it doesn't look like I need to draw on those. Although I did find it really interesting, I put it on a public LinkedIn post, how many more people contact me privately in private messages as opposed to post them publicly. So already kudos to everyone who is willing to offer their taboo idea in this public forum. Okay, I'm going to start on this side. We have two on the front row here and here, and then I'm going to throw to the back on the other side. Go for it. Give us your taboo idea.
Mine's actually a question, if that's okay, for Stephen Donnelly. As an Irish young person, I think Ireland's amazing, and I think we have one of the best governments in the world. And I agree with you that Ireland could be a global leader, so thank you for what you said. I really loved your idea about the media, but I was wondering, do you think that there's an active movement in the media in Ireland pushing this negative rhetoric, and if that's having any impact, if that exists at all? Or do you think that it might be beneficial for us to incorporate civic education in the media, or perhaps in schools, if not in the media?
I could just ask your name.
Oh, sorry. I'm Alexandra. I'm from Kerry.
Thank you. And we'll go down to the front then as well.
Thanks. Joe Musgrave. My taboo idea is we need to rehabilitate Charles Haughey thought. Okay. By which I mean... The National Treasury Management Agency and the IFSC were direct creations of Haughey. And one of the things we're talking about right now is how do we both have big ideas and implement them. And if you look at both health and planning, what we've done is create a whole series of structures to get rid of corruption as much as we can see it. But it means the system is less responsible and responsive to politicians. But Haughey made those things directly accountable to him. So I think we need to take away the corruption from Haughey, but look to him as an example of how to drive big ideas through the Irish political system.
Can we also get the free turkeys at Christmas? Can we go to get some at the back there? Gosh, I've never seen so. Pick a hand. Go on. Yeah.
Thank you. Catherine Lynch is my name. I'm also the co-chair of a network called Innovate Ireland, trying to drive a culture of innovation in Ireland. And I'm looking at this room, and I frequently look at elections, and I'm asking your suggestions on how we shift from expecting perfection and punishing risk-taking, both in our politics and in our culture. It may be a pendulum swing from the aforementioned previous Taoiseach that we had where things went bad. But unless we culturally reward taking a managed risk, there's no such thing as perfection in life. How do we get beyond the incremental to drive the visionary if we don't encourage and support that politically?
Okay. So, given there were a couple of questions, and I do want to come to, I can see so many hands, and I'm going to empower the microphone people to just start going to as many people as possible in a moment. But there was a question here around civic education in media, which I might put to you, Stephen, as you were doing that. And also knowing that innovation is also part of your work with the think tank, I think maybe responding to that last question, if that's okay.
So what's going on with the journalists, essentially, is the question, if I understand it. They've been put under a completely unsustainable level of pressure, right? We've seen newspapers shut down, we've seen journalists lose their jobs, the money has shifted online, and so the journalists are under an increasing amount of pressure to just get copy out. Unfortunately, we as human beings are wired to bad news. We are drawn to it. There's evidence showing that we watch, bad social media videos longer than good ones, right? We're just drawn to it. So partly it's the pressure that the mainstream media are under, and I'd love to see a way of some funding mechanism to support that and really understanding how important mainstream media is. I think it's more important than it's ever been. I think it's partly that. I think however, I think we have got into a habit, a deeply ingrained habit of, I think for some, the journalists I know a good number of journalists. The journalists I know, they're good people who care about their country and care about their craft of journalism. I would argue, and I used to have this debate with some of them and say, you are only reporting on bad news. I'm biased because I was the minister and it was me they were, shouting at. But I was saying to them, it's not that you shouldn't shine a light on the bad things. You should, but have you no interest in any of the progress being made? And the answer generally was no, we don't. We just don't have any interest in that, or my editor just doesn't have any interest in that. I'll give you one quick example. We had an international cancer conference. I gave a 10-minute keynote speech on all the progress that other people have been making, lots of it. I had one sentence in 10 minutes, which was on clinical trials. Ireland, we are a laggard. We are badly performing, but we've just established a national team that are going to make us top 5 in Europe in the next 5 years. The only coverage I saw of the entire conference was Minister accepts failure on clinical trials, right? And so I think we need to engage with the journalists and the editors and say, look, we are going to find a funding mechanism to give you guys a sustainable career where you're not worried about being fired and you're not under so much pressure. At the same time, can we have some way of checking in on, you can't obviously interfere with the free media, but is there some way we can even know what level of balance we have?
And I might just actually link it to our last question, because I think, yes, that happens in politics, but I also see that happening quite frequently in the business world as well, where actually the decisions to make things or get it through the board or pass through things, and the fear of, I think it was perfection of things being perfect, can often hamper things. In terms of kind of what you see around innovation and the think tank and your ideas there, like how would you respond to the lady at the back?
Yeah, it's a universal problem of government, I think, that you create something new and then it kind of gets gradually sucked into the centre, into the machine. And the machine, the big machine of government, is not very specialised, sort of just does what it does. For a bunch of things that you need done, the machine is adequate to the task. usually simple enough stuff. But if you're talking about innovation, trying to fund blue sky innovation, which ought to be a responsibility of government, or I think about digging metro tunnels. Like the blob is not adequate to that task. The NTMA, the blob wasn't adequate. That was why he created the NTMA. So there needs to be, I think, a constant pushing back on creating new institutions with the right incentives and the right culture and the right governance to do this, specific jobs that we need done. Maybe in the understanding that eventually their destiny is to be sucked back in again over decades, because that's just how things happen. The NTMA has managed not to so far. But you need to constantly push back on that and create these new institutions with fresh mandates.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're going to go back to Taboo Ideas. And what I'm going to suggest is that we alternate from side to side so the microphone could go as quickly from people to person on both sides. We'll start down here at the front, because all we've got so far is that we need to channel Charlie Haughey. Give us more Taboo Ideas.
Taboo idea. It's to do with getting older, because currently you go from your house to a nursing home. But there's a space that is underserved. I don't know what it is. It could be Macaulay Place down in Naas, and it's freeing up property but allowing the person to be independent and have an independent life. Just a comment on your idea. Will D4 folks only allow D4 type developments under your model?
Is it a quick answer, or I want to go to another? We'll go to another idea, and we'll.
I suspect that Aylesbury Road would not be redeveloped, but I think different neighbourhoods will make different trade-offs, and certain neighbourhoods we'd be very happy to take. Like you're talking about aging in place, people might say, "I would like to stay in my neighbourhood. I like my neighbourhood. I need some money to help with my retirement. My home is too big. I happen to own a tenth of an acre in the city. That's an asset. Maybe I could use this scheme to solve those problems."
Okay. I see there's a microphone working. Or to lady. Yeah.
I'm Marie Sweeney, and I'm a very proud Donegal person. But I'm not very proud of what is happening to my county. We are completely forgotten up here by Dublin. I don't know if they know that we're here at all, or that because we are a border and so far north, we are not looked after at all. And like they were talking about, you can imagine how long it takes to go from Malin or from bloody Foreland to Dublin or Galway for a hospital. And the only thing that might be good happening about the hospital in Letterkenny is not, it's nearly looking like it, that it's not going to happen, and it's going to be a nursing home for a huge county that is completely forgotten. And the same thing happens, like when you were talking, Stephen, it really was about Dublin. And being away from it doesn't give you any great rights. And as far as we're concerned, we are knocked out from Dublin to Galway, and nothing really happens above that. So I would like to... Thank you.
Okay, we'll take another one from this side. Keen to hear ideas. Happy to take comments and questions, but very keen on your ideas. Come on.
Hi, thanks very much. I'd like to point out I'm not Peadar Tóibín either. I did, because of this particular idea, I did take the time to sit by the emergency exit. I think over the last 2 days, one of the things, I'm sorry, this isn't a diatribe, but there is a question here. One of the things that has really struck me around infrastructure is the limitations on and our inability to deliver. And Seán, like you, Jess, I read your paper in relation to how Melbourne delivered their metro systems and stuff like that, and how you identify things like governance and the way project setups are different. I've been involved in, I suppose, a lot of bigger projects over the years here, and one thing and David McWilliams in the last few days in his podcast spoke about how we have so much money in this country and we have delivered so little on an infrastructural basis. And yesterday there was a great analogy from the lady from the SRI. Said we're like a child who has a growth spurt and then finds that the clothes don't fit them anymore, and we just seem to be caught in this. And one of the issues that I think we should address, and my very taboo idea, and I'm going to make for the door in a sec, is that we should fire civil servants who don't achieve independently assessed performance metrics. Okay. And I specifically mean civil servants. I don't mean public servants. I don't mean our teachers, our guards, our nurses. But in public servants, and I know, civil servants, and in my experience, that is where a lot, because they've no skin in the game, because their paycheck turns up every month. And no offence to anyone here, because I'm sure there are probably lots of civil servants here. There are lots of very good ones, but there's lots of really bad ones in my experience. So that is my big idea. Fired if they don't meet independently assessed performance criteria.
Okay, thank you for that idea. And there's a couple of people down the front. Oh, you've got someone, go for it.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Reel Horvat. I'm from Limerick. And I would just like to say I have not fond memories of how you helped UHL in Limerick. We're still in a very bad situation. That's an aside. Secondly, I've been amazed by the Dublin-centric focus of this discussion today. And I would say, as far as transport is concerned, Limerick, Clare, all around that area is a whole open area. We have a wonderful airport which is underutilised. I came back, I was away for 35 years in several countries, proudly Irish, very happy to come back. I came back in 2014 to stop my mother going into a nursing home here. No regrets. And what I would say is I'm very proudly Irish, and I've been amazed that young people in primary school are not taught how to be proud of being Irish. Neither are they taught about languages and the importance of having languages to go abroad. Just a comment.
Okay, thank you for your comments. There's some down the front. We'll go back over to this side, and I'll take one more from this side, and then maybe we'll have a conversation. Yeah.
Dolores Gallagher, Donegal.
Hello.
Just two small suggestions. First of all, looking around our congregation here, we need more young people. So every transition year student should get a free ticket to come here. That's the first thing. Secondly, our country is going to pay huge fines now in 2030 for carbon emissions. I believe that the money that is going to be spent paying for those carbon emission sanctions should be utilised to free and for nothing insulate every house in Ireland and put solar panels on every roof in Ireland. And thirdly, I look out on the Swilly every day. The tide comes in and out twice a day. Winter, summer, day, night. Why do we not have a series of turbines running down the middle of every big estuary? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, tickets for transition year students, insulate every house, turbines everywhere. We'll go to this man at the front.
Hi, John Hannigan, CEO of Circle Voluntary Housing Association. First of all, that lady that said about ageing in place, there is projects now being delivered which is doing exactly that, and I welcome you to come up and see us in Dublin. Unfortunately, it's Dublin, in Inchicore, but certainly come and see us. My idea is probably a little bit would be unhappy in some of the local authorities, but that is to take away the democratic element of some planning requirements, because the strategic nature of what we need to deliver, as Seán has actually demonstrated, is very important. But I don't think we can leave it to politics to actually make the decisions. And every planning permission at this point in time is a democratic process, but actually leads to something happening or leads to something not happening at times. So I would say that it should be an executive position, maybe on a national basis, but certainly within each local authority, not a political one.
Okay. I'm just going to do a time check with the organisers. Okay, we are going to have to wrap up, I'm afraid. However, I am loving the energy for the number of hands that have shot in the air for Taboo ideas. So I'm going to figure out some kind of forum where they can be suggested, because there are some other brilliant ones that I have heard, everything from legalising drugs to open borders to completely rethinking the electoral system. There are so many things that actually are great to get out there, to make people frown, to get curious about, and then have debate and discussion. So I hope this has given some fuel for conversations over coffee and over pints later on. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank my two panelists for being brave enough to bring ideas that made you all frown a little. Thank you.